All right. So I'm just going to introduce the the podcast first. I've started a new podcast. It's called the Spirit Experience Podcast, and every week I bring on a spiritual teacher to talk about connecting with spirit, releasing attachment, finding happiness. Just a way to build a spiritual practice for happiness. And this last week, I had Nat van Zee. She is a spiritual therapist and has a number of different modalities. So she was on the podcast with me this week. And each week, I like to bring my guest on live with you so you guys can actually meet them and really get to know them better. So, Nat, uh, one of the first things I wanted to talk about tonight was a therapy, a modality that you have called internal family systems, IFS. And I thought it might be great if you could tell our listeners what that is and how it works.
Okay, sure. Well, in simple terms, we are all multiple personalities. So that's the premise of the therapy. So when you have a part of you that wants to sit on the sofa and watch TV, and the other part of you wants to go to a party, and they are kind of in conflict, um, in IFS, so that's short for internal family systems, we connect with the different parts of us and have a conversation. So typically they could be like the inner critic, or the procrastinator, or like yesterday I worked with a client and he works in finance and he has this frustration part coming up. And what we are trained to do in the way we've been raised generally is like to repress these emotions. But actually, when we start to have a conversation with them, it turns out they actually like have our best interests at heart and usually are wanting to protect us. So, for instance, with this frustration part of the client, he, it was like a red flag. Hi, you need to change the strategy. It's not working out. So in the dialogue that we have, we find out what does the part want to communicate. And usually it's protecting a more vulnerable part of us. So throughout our life, often in early life, we may have had or like traumatic experience, we may have events or memories where we kind of stuck and frozen because they were traumatic. And what we do in the session is if we get permission from this protector, we go and help the younger parts, and usually that's kind of like holding emotional burdens. So it could be shame, it could be anger, it could be sadness. And then in the process, we'll invite the younger part to come to the present, to unburden their pain to the elements. So, the child could give it to the water, the earth, the fire, the light, the wind. And it's a really beautiful creative process. We could even maybe integrate art so that, there's a way to express this. And then it's up to the client's homework is to reparent that younger part, particularly the next 30 days. And then the protector parts, like the anxious one or the critic, they can change roles. So instead of being the inner critic, it can be a coach, because it doesn't need to protect that young part anymore, because the client is now doing that. So that's in a nutshell the process.
That's so interesting because when I heard the name of it, internal family systems, I guess I didn't realize that it meant it was all internally within you. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, so it's like your internal family, and they all have different characters, right? So we invite the client to give them a name. So I recently had like my own process where I called one the dancer, And the dancer is a bit of a rebel and, you know, like doesn't want to conform. And when you give them a name, instead of identifying with it and saying, I am anxious, you're creating some distance between them, and you realize that the emotion is not you. It is just a part of you that's usually like guiding you to take a different course. So instead of like saying emotions are bad, we'll actually help our clients to be with the emotion. And any emotion, if you see a toddler and they have a tantrum and then afterwards they start to play, it's basically, and this science confirms this, if you are with an emotion within 90 seconds, it will move through you. But if you try and repress it, it's like pushing down a beach ball under the water. It takes a lot of effort, right? And all that effort, all that energy is drained from your system. So if you actually let it go and express itself, then you have all this energy to actually work on your goals, to create your dreams. And when you connect with that inner child of you, you know, that has been maybe sad, once they release the sadness, they can really be your biggest ally in, like, you know, being creative, being intuitive, courageous, has all these innate qualities. Really, that is you in your essence. So yeah, it's beautiful work. It also works super well with any spiritual modalities. The IFS is combined with lots of other modalities, like, you know, plant medicine, breath work, shamanism. And sometimes what we find in the system is what IFS calls unattached burdens. And that's actually energy that does not belong to you. So if it doesn't belong to you, then you know that, and it's a really fine-tuning thing. It's not something that's easily to be discerned, but usually basically the energy is not protecting. It's, you know, it's actually draining you. So then we have a process where you actually let go of it. In effect, that's spirit release therapy. But
Right.
IFS calls it unattached, unattached burden. But it's, yeah, it correlates. IFS is science approved. They've had lots of studies. I love the fact that, for instance, I work with a lot of people that are perfectionists and people pleasers. And there is this study where there's a group of women that all have rheumatoid arthritis. And during the study, when they were having IFS, they learned to honor their boundaries. So instead of like overstretching them and pleasing others, they learned to actually listen to their body. And as they were doing that, their pain was reducing. So there is a direct correlation between chronic pain or other bodily symptoms and our emotional states. And so what we do in the process is learn people, once they actually listen to their body, listen to, you know, what their inner parts wanting to communicate, they can feel better. They, you know, like pain can go. I've had a client in San Francisco who I worked with who was seeing a chiropractor, and she'd be seeing him for ages. I can't remember how long, because she's like a semi-pro rower. And after one session where I cleared an unattached burden, she went to a chiropractor, and he was like, "What have you done?" And she said, "Well, I've had this session." And he was like, "You don't need to see me anymore. Your hips are aligned now." And she has no more pain.
Wow. Oh, that's
So it's powerful. Yeah.
I do have a question that has come up in the feed. So how would you relate IFS to the modality of healing your inner child?
We heal the inner child in IFS, so it's integrated.
Okay.
Yeah.
They are kind of separate modalities, or I guess there's a lot of different modalities that you would use if you were going to heal what they call your inner child.
I would say I train in a lot of modalities, and there are lots of correlations, and people just give it different names.
Okay.
But in essence, the inner child, you know, in IFS, we work with the inner child for sure. The inner child is, but it could be inner children. So it could be like you at 7 that had a traumatic event, you as a teenager that had a traumatic event. So it's not, we actually work with multiple parts that whichever come to the forefront. And for anyone that wants to explore what this might look like, there's a brilliant Facebook book called IFS Art, and in that group, lots of people actually draw their parts, so and their communication with it. So it's, you know, like they could be cartoon characters, they could be Lego figures, like everybody has their own unique interaction with them. So instead of it just being only one child, we could have multiple children, we could have multiple parts. And for someone that has been diagnosed either like bipolar or multiple personalities, their parts have been are more extreme because of the trauma they've experienced. And so they're more amplified. But in effect, we know that, you know, in this modality, when you start working on the parts, and this is, you know, the premise of the therapy is that we all have an innate healing capacity. So if you get a cut on your skin, you know the skin can heal itself. You just put a plaster on it. It's the same with the psyche. So if there's any, like, you know, people that know more about all the labels that we get as mental disorders, so ADHD, you know, bipolar, whatever it is, there's a book called the DSM that, you know, categorizes all these medical labels. And in IFS, we see that as like an expression of a part. So it's just their behavior, it's their personality. But once you start to do the internal work and start to communicate it, these parts can change their function, like in a business organization. And then your true essence that is above all these personalities, it's a little bit like you have the bird's eye view. So your self energy, then it becomes the self leader. So you can see you have all these different actors in a play. So say I feel, you know, I feel the anxiety coming up now. I can speak to my anxious part, you know, what is it you want to communicate? Thank you for the warning. I've got this, right? So instead, it's a little bit like you can see the parts as children. Yes, they can sit in the car, but they cannot drive the car. The self energy, our essence will be driving the car. So we can still have communication with the passengers, with the children, but they're not driving because they're not qualified.
I heard you say earlier, and this was actually one of my questions. You said that IFS works with a number of different spiritual modalities. Because one of my questions was going to be, is IFS in itself a spiritual modality? What do you say about that? Because I know it's also a scientific modality.
Well, define spirit. You know, if you, to me, like spirit to me means true self. And And so for me, like, yeah, IFS is a science-based study that acknowledges the bridge to our spirituality, right? So it really acknowledges that, you know, body, mind, spirit are all one. They're not separated. It's whole. It's truly holistic. So if you know, like, was it Einstein? You know, many scientists knew that consciousness is what we are. So yeah, no, it's not going to say we're a spiritualist therapy, right? Because they want to make sure that they are acknowledged in the science-based world, because in our world, most of the people find that is important. However, because it recognizes, you know, all consciousness, and you know that we have an innate healing capacity, and that our essence or our self, which is what is actually communicated in so many religions and traditions, you know, is our core soul, so to speak, what remains when we pass. And the parts can be seen as literal, they are often developed because of, you know, of our upbringing. So say you had, you know, a parent that was an addict, then, you know, maybe like you know, a protector had to step in to keep you safe, right? So that worked for you in your childhood, but now as an adult, that doesn't work anymore. So it keeps you small, stops you from being seen. So, you know, what we do is basically any programming that you had as a young child in, you know, from age to age 7, we basically help you update that. First, become aware of it, because if you're not aware of it, you can't change it.
Right.
And then once you become aware of it, you learn to communicate with it. And really, any trigger that you have in the world, because the world is our earth school, this is how we learn as a soul, any trigger, either with a partner, with a colleague, is indicating an unhealed part in yourself. So when you learn to heal the part within you, you're also improving the relationship either with your partner, with your colleague, and you start to be a better leader in an organization. So what I love about IFS is that it talks a lot about activism, and I used to be, you know, very much into activism, and it speaks about if you do activism from like a hurt child self, you'll risk burning out. And it also talks about like the way we communicate to ourselves is how we communicate to others, and that is what's even playing out in politics. So any warfare is also an indication of like her parts being polarized and just, you know, creating mayhem. So if everybody did their inner work, you know, and learned to love themselves, you don't want to hurt anyone else anymore. So truly the core of it, which I feel is spiritual, is self-forgiveness, is forgiving others. It's letting go, not holding on onto the poison that, you know, we might be drinking, hoping to hurt someone else. And that in its core is super spiritual. Any, you know, whatever religion you are, it's like, it's about, you know, being kind, forgiving, yeah, like being one with nature, you know, honoring your ancestors, honoring the elements, the earth that feeds us, you know, the animals. For me, that is so spiritual.
Yeah, and I had only asked that because I wasn't sure if it was considered a spiritual modality or not, but it seemed to me in reading about it today, on some of the links that you have, it seemed to me that it would would be considered spiritual because it is mind, body, spirit. And because if we don't treat the whole mind, body, spirit, we're not treating the whole person.
Yeah.
Okay. Something else that, and you said, you mentioned this earlier, and it is a question of mine. I know that IFS is used to heal a lot of trauma, a lot of emotional trauma, mental, physical. But you said something about goals. And one of my questions was, do you use IFS to also help people, become more productive, more successful, more, I don't know if I'm finding the right word, but, in reaching goals that they want to do, finding those blocks that are stopping them from really doing the things, living into their purpose?
Oh, for sure. I mean, like the client I was speaking about earlier, the one that felt the frustration at work, was coming to me because he wanted to find more happiness at work and, perform better. And, what people call blocks are usually parts.
Parts.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just the same, different words, same thing. So if you have a procrastinator part, or if you have a brain fog, usually when you give that part a voice, it actually wants to communicate that it's trying to help you. So I had another client that would get brain fog. She'd been burned out. And when we connected to this part, it said, I only arrive because you don't take a break. If you take breaks and if you don't work so hard, I'm not necessary. It was amazing.
It really sounds like amazing work to me. And I just want to talk to the listeners on the call. If you have any questions for Nat, go ahead and type them in. I'm trying to make sure that she gets to answer those for anybody. And we are talking with Nat van Zee. She is an IFS therapist. She does a lot of different modalities. And she was on the podcast with me this week. And that's the Spirit Experience podcast. So any questions, go ahead and type them in. I know she'd be glad to answer them. One of the things that you talked about earlier too was people pleasing. And I know in our interview you said that you grew up a people pleaser. How did you get past that? Was it through this modality, or was it another that started that healing?
Yeah, so I just want to, like the people pleaser word is coming up so much, right? But I want to actually just go into that, what that means. Because it can be seen as a good thing, right? Because you want to help people. So how I was raised was like you look after other people, right? You care. But what happens with a people pleaser is you overextend the responsibility for another. So for me, actually, my biggest learning point was when I was in a relationship and we were together for almost 7 years. And I saw his potential and I poured my energy in him to kind of help him blossom. And this is so typical for women. And then at the end, as he started to become more confident, the codependent relationship between us shifted. So we weren't bonded anymore. And then he cheated on me. And I was so angry because I was like, why didn't he have the balls just to finish it with me, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, I had therapy after that. And one big thing that I learned from that is when she connected me to my childhood, I said I couldn't remember too much about it. And then I started talking about my granddad who died when I was 7. And all of a sudden I started crying, like literally floodgates. And I was really surprised. And this was 24 years after he had died. Mm-hmm. And when I spoke to my mum about this, she said, you never cried. You know, I was 7. My mum completely broke down. She became depressed. She was on sleeping medication. You know, so as a young child, I knew I had to be strong and had to care for her. I felt so much responsibility to be there for her. You know, my dad even took me to see my granddad as he was, you know, in a coffin. And I remember, you know, and I'd never cried. And I remember when he was like in the coffin at the funeral and he was going down into the earth. I remember I was wearing a white woolen hat and it was really itchy. And the whole time I wanted to be really close. And at that point, I just wanted to be away. Like it was so difficult for me. But that came up in that therapy session, right? 24 years later, I had no idea that I'd been holding on to that grief for all that time. Wow. And this is so common in the sessions. So in that therapy, I learned that I never wanted to make that mistake again, where I poured all my life force, you know, into someone else, and then actually them, you know, cheating on me. Like it was like, it's so common for women to put all their energy into someone else because they see the potential. And actually what you are doing is you are interfering with their soul path because it's their responsibility to fix their life. Mm-hmm. And I had a very powerful session with a client years ago, and we did a past life therapy session. And when she connected to her higher self, and she had the question, should I stay with my partner or not? And she talked about him like the 5th child. They already had 4 children. And she hadn't told me the full picture. But anyway, her higher mind was very clear. And it said, you are blocking his development by taking care of him. Leave. So anyway, she did, after that session, decided to leave him, and it was a breakthrough from her. She told me afterwards that he'd been alcoholic, you know, so he had his issues, and now she's got a new partner, and you know, she's also a healer, so she's in a much better place. So I think that all of that process helped me, but also I'm helping my clients see that, you know, whenever they're close to burnout or whenever they're taking responsibility away from their partner, they're not serving the people they're trying to help, and they are losing their life force, so they can't work on their own issues, right? So they don't do their own inner work. It's transference of responsibility. Really, they need to first, like, you know, when you're in the airplane, it says use the oxygen first before you help your children. It's the same thing. If we do our inner work, then from a whole place, from a powerful place, we can help others, right? But know where the line is, right? And you know what is true to myself, and what is you know, what they need to know for themselves. What is their learning experience? And this is a thing that I help people understand a lot, because I work with a lot of empaths and highly sensitives. And I ask them, what is your energy? What is their energy? Because a lot of the time people are soaking up people's, you know, their energy, right? Mm-hmm. And it's impacting them, and it's depleting their energy. And so it's really about setting practical and energetic boundaries. And most people don't speak about that.
Yeah. It would be nice if that was common, so that we could do that. Let's see, I don't see any other questions that have come up. Is there any last thing that you'd like to tell people about IFS, and then we'll let them know how they can connect with you?
Okay, well, if you take away anything, and I said this to my client recently, that just finished her program with me. If there's anything that you'll take away from, the work we've done together, is that, to be with your emotions, to see them as children. They just want to be acknowledged, heard, and seen. And if you just breathe into them and sit with them and just allow them to be there, they will move through. And this is like the paradox of transformation, because we are thinking we need to push it down, repress it. But the moment we allow it to be there, this is how it can move through.
I love that, and I love the analogy that you gave earlier. Some people probably weren't on the call by then, but that if you don't just allow them to be there or allow them to move through, it's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater, which is really hard to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you'd like to get or connect with Nat, she was on the episode, so in my link in bio, you can see there's a link directly to the podcast, and you can find her episode. But also you can connect with her at Van Zee Being, VanZeeBeing. That's her handle on Instagram. And any other, and vanzeebeing.com is her website.
Thank you, Cheryl. So great to talk to you.
You as well. Thanks again, Nat. And I hope we'll have more conversations on the podcast down in the future.
Wonderful. Look forward to it. Have a great evening.
You too. Thanks. Thanks for being here. All right. Bye, everybody.